So our next speaker is Theresa Regli. Theresa, why don't you come on up and join me? I think Theresa's a well-known analyst in the field, if not the best-known analyst in the field. So Theresa is the principal at the Real Story Group. She began her career, as many of us know, as in writing about technology and technology startups back for a newspaper in Boston. She then worked for a systems integrator and for a series of startups. She's been with the Real Story Group for how long?
6 years.
6 years, and covers digital asset management, which many of you know personally from her great work in helping all of us to understand the landscape of vendor offerings in digital asset management, the key trends in the field. The Real Story Group has had a lot of fabulous client work that Theresa's overseen directly with the UK National Trust, with the British Museum, with Shell Oil, with IKEA, and many other illustrious clients. Theresa also teaches seminars and presents keynotes at events throughout the world. She holds degrees and certifications in linguistics, French and European studies from universities here and abroad, as well as certifications in interesting wines and restaurants. So many of us have, I think in the room, had the chance to interact directly with Theresa and with the hard work that her company does in tracking digital asset management. The analyst services are so critical to those of you who are embarking upon a journey of either acquiring digital asset management systems, upgrading the systems that you already have, and I look forward to benefiting from some of her insights on the current landscape. Theresa?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, David, for that introduction. It's great to see so many familiar faces, and for those of us who've never been here before, I really want to welcome you as well to this event. For me, it's always a highlight and a great pleasure to be here. As David mentioned, he gave you a little bit of background on us. I've been working in IT in one way or another, time to wake up, for about 17 years. And DAM for me has been a focus for about the past 4 or 5 years. And it's been a great pleasure for me to work in this particular field because I really love working with the very creative minds that are part of digital asset management. So I've prepared a presentation today that tells a few personal stories, and hopefully those personal stories will help you think in some new ways about how you might do your jobs, and also how you might think about the brands and the media that you manage. And then I'll talk in more practical terms, really about what the market is like today, what digital asset managers might be able to leverage from a technology standpoint, and also how you should be thinking about technology as you look to implement it and as you look to your future in DAM planning. So David told you a little bit about our company. We've actually been in business for 10 years now. Just celebrated our 10 years in business. The core of our business, as David also mentioned, is really analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of tools. Actually, we usually say weaknesses first, because we're really in this for the buyers and the consumers of technology. We only work for buyers and help them make better technology decisions. That's really our theme. We also do a lot of strategic planning, and we help people pick products. We don't believe there are best technology products. It's kind of like picking a mate, or a car, or some kind of wine that you might have with dinner. Depending on what you're eating and what you like from another person and what kind of things you like in your life, you're going to pick a different car or a different mate or a different bottle of wine. It's the same thing with vendors. So many vendors will tell you they're the best in the world, but the real thing is, or the most appropriate thing really, is that there's a right vendor for you. And that's the core tenet of our business. We have about 3,000 customers in over 60 countries. We have analysts on 3 continents, and that's a quick overview of us. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about brand. Perry talks more about media, and I'm going to focus on brands today. Tell you a few personal stories. I think a lot about brands. What do they mean? And when I get a new customer or I work with a new client, I try to immerse myself in their brand. I really want to make sure I understand it before I advise them on what kind of technology they need to make their brand dreams come true or their brand goals a reality. So recently, I had a very interesting experience where I really realized everything had a brand. And I had a wonderful vacation recently. I'll tell you a little bit about what I did on my spring vacation. I was in Provence. Some of you know that I'm quite a Francophile. And I've always been someone who's had the great honor of spending a lot of my life in Europe. And Provence is a place that has a brand. Most places have a brand. New York has a brand. Think about the things that mean New York, right? The yellow cabs, for example. That's an icon that really says New York. There's several things that also really say Provence, right? There's the idea of lavender in the field, beautiful rolling hills. For English speakers in modern times, there was a very famous book from Peter Mayle, many of you probably know, a British author who bought a beautiful farmhouse in the south of France, and he wrote a series of wonderful books about his experiences in Provence. So I realized when I started planning this trip that I had an incredibly strong sense of this place, and I'd never actually even been there. And this is true of brands as well. I've seen a lot of Van Gogh art throughout the world. There's some here in New York, there's a lot in London, places I go and work often. And he, of course, in different times of his life actually went to these places, and he painted these places with great vivid color and imagination. And really, when you see his art, it immerses you in that world. Even in some cases, very in a sensationalistic way, he sort of exaggerated the way the trees look. And this is actually quite a realistic, I learned actually quite a realistic view of the trees in that area. So I had this very interesting experience where I went to this actual real place, and actually also visited a media immersion experience that represented this particular place, in this place. Now, let me show you on the screen here. This is actually a giant grotto in the south of France. Now, the south of France, for those of you who had the good fortune to be there, is full of these giant stone mountains. And what they've done is they've actually taken one of these stone mountains and opened up this grotto in a stone mountain. And they've said, well, let's make our home region larger than life. Let's actually allow people to walk in this stone grotto and take all the art and everything that makes the brand and put it in this grotto and make it larger than life. So you look at this room, this feels like a very big room, but imagine that you're walking into a giant stone grotto in the side of a mountain, and you have huge, giant ceilings, big wide room, and you can see that person who's standing there between the N and the G. That, in fact, is a real person in this grotto. And this was the experience that I had in this grotto. So essentially what they've done is they've taken everything that means something to their brand, and I thought to myself, wow, here I am walking through this grotto, and it's actually better than the real thing. Right? You go and you see art about Provence, and you're sort of in this big crowd, and you might be staring over, and I had this really wonderful experience. Even when I walked out the door, I almost thought, wow, I feel like I've experienced Provence more in this grotto than I am when I'm actually walking through the fields, because the lavender wasn't in bloom at the time, and there was a drought, so there wasn't much color either. So I actually had a better experience in this grotto than I did when I actually was experiencing the actual place. So I want you to think about this over the next couple days. What can you do to create this sort of brand experience? This company that did this, they call themselves Culture Spaces. They create culture spaces. And this really made me think about brand spaces. And how do we actually take our brand beyond the traditional digital asset management concepts of just creating our brochures, creating our advertisements, creating our billboards? How do we really create the idea of a brand space, a more immersive experience? As Perry already brought up that word, I was happy when she used the word immersive, because it's a word that I'm also going to use quite a bit. There's a lot of brand spaces that already exist in our general consumption of assets, or media even. So this is a Nike Town brand space. You walk in, can't you just feel the shoeness? It's all about the shoes, right? It's not just a space. It is immersive. It is about the brand. It is about shoes. And I don't own a pair of Nike shoes, actually, at all. But this really makes me feel like this is about Nike. Interestingly, you could even use this as a model for something else, even though it's a store. You could give this to somebody 5 years from now and say, okay, create a game. You know, create a game about Nike, or a Nike branded game. And this could be used almost as a plan, or a planogram, if I might use that word. It kind of brings you into this sort of experience of Nike. So how can you think about using assets not just as assets, but as a stylistic reference, right, to create something that's larger and broader and immersive? It's important that brands be experiential for several reasons. This is something that I found actually on the website of a company, that this is what they do, is create these brand spaces. And this is also very relevant to me, because I'm somebody that I really only learn by doing. You can tell me something and I might forget. This is why, as an analyst, I never could have been a technology analyst if I hadn't actually used these systems and implemented these systems before. I would not feel qualified to write about them and evaluate them. So it's the same thing here. I hear and I forget something, I see and I might remember, but if you experience it, you really understand it. And this is what you want to think about when you're communicating your brand. How do you make people experience it rather than just see it or hear it? And this is actually from a company called BrandSpace. That's all they do, is create these brand spaces. And they're not the only company that does it. There's also companies that are doing it just for entertainment, right? It's the whole mediafication of our business, as Barry talked about. I'll use the word gamification too. Sometimes you can go into these domes. This is an example in downtown Los Angeles, where they create a dome. Essentially, you walk into it and you're actually immersed in this world, just like in the grotto in France. And sometimes it's actually a game. It's interactive. You're moving. These expectations get created that we're going to have these immersive brands, that we're going to be entertained when we are experiencing a brand. And we carry these expectations to our work. I find more and more that the expectations around enterprise technology are that it should be fun. And it's really not. Let's be honest. I'm the cynic always at these conferences when it comes to technology. That's my role. And I will tell you, as many of you know, that enterprise technology is not particularly fun. I had I'll tell you my next personal story before I get into some practical advice. Games and apps in general, the apps that we use every day, are very much game-like, right? Even if you're a Foursquare fan or Facebook, you might be competing with friends all the time on your little apps, whatever it is. I started earlier this year working with a gaming company, a very large gaming company, and I realized when that happened that the last time I played a game was about this period. I loved Space Invaders and I loved Night Driver. Do anyone remember this game? Okay, so I had an Atari 2600, and this one was especially great because the car doesn't move in this game. It's the road that moves. It's very high tech. So when I was brought on board to help plan for the next generation of DAM for a company called Ubisoft earlier this year, I thought, oh my gosh, I have to immerse myself in this brand. I have to make sure I understand, what this brand is all about. Anyone play Raving Rabbids here? Anyone know the Raving Rabbids? Okay, we've got a few. Okay, so Ubisoft has this. This is a 300 million copy strong game, okay, called the Raving Rabbids. And when I landed this client, who knew them my best but my 13-year-old nephew and my 10-year-old niece, who thought suddenly I was the coolest ant on the planet because I was going to work with the Raving Rabbids. So I thought to myself, okay, I really have to understand this brand before I go work with this company and understand what it's all about. And so I went to my niece and nephew's house, and this is what I realized, this is what's setting the expectation for software in the future, is experiences like this. So needless to say, this is not what enterprise software feels like. It's not particularly fun, but it made me realize, here's my 13-year-old nephew who will be entering the workforce in about 10 years, and this is what he's used to. And if you put him in front of a digital asset management system today, he'd go, oh my God. This is tough, it's difficult to figure out, and it's not particularly fun either. Anyway, so I immersed myself in the brand. There I am, figuring it out. So I bring this up, I bring up these examples because it is setting our expectations. These concepts of immersion, these experiences of immersion, these experiences of media and these experiences of gaming are really what we need to drive to when it comes to managing our brand, when it comes to creating brand spaces in our environments. And also, when we think about getting practical, and when we think about enterprise technology, we need to raise the bar. We need to do better. And this is a challenge to service providers out there, not just to vendors, but also to those of you who are systems integrators and to those of you who lead these teams. We need to raise the bar. We should have enterprise software that is as easy to use and frankly makes people want to use it just as much as my nieces and nephews want to play games. So, on a practical level, how do we create brand spaces? Well, a few things. I'm going to create a bit of a checklist for you. DAM today is so different than even 5 years ago when I started following it. And David Lipsey was one of the first people I was introduced to in the space. And has always over the years given me so much historical context. And when I think about the way DAM used to be so siloed, and how now DAM is so much more about bringing many, many things together. It is not just about managing digital assets. It's about rich media content, personalization. It's about multi-channel. So much about multi-channel. You can't just think in terms of one channel anymore. It's also about online marketing. You can't just manage your assets without thinking about who is it targeting, how is it going to them, how is it going to be personalized based on the device that they're on, based on the bandwidth they're using, whatever it might be. So this ties into also the CRM that both David and Perry brought up. It's about collaboration, not just internal collaboration, but for instance, if you're working with agencies all over the world, how can you collaborate with them? How can you avoid having to send around these huge files via email? How can you have a collaborative space where you can talk about this brand experience that you're creating? How do you have the technology to do that? You need to have a lot of analytical information. You need to know what people need and when they're using it and how they're using it so that you can adapt to those analytics. And you need user profiling and personalization, as I mentioned. So DAM today is really about bringing all this together. It is not just about managing digital assets. It's about integrating all of these things. I'm going to show my techie stack as well, just like Perry did. Here's mine. It's just purple. It's on brand for Real Story Group. So, and I won't talk about this at great length, but the idea here is that this is really your checklist. These are not silos anymore. You see a lot of stacks just for digital asset management and just for web content management or just for your document management. And sometimes these systems will offer the sorts of services that are all on the bottom. So a DAM vendor or a document management vendor or a media management vendor, doesn't matter. They will all say, well, we provide collaboration services, we provide authorization services, search, indexing, workflow. We have repositories, you can pick whether you want Oracle, SQL, whatever. But the reality is these things need to stretch across all your technologies. And the information needs to work together. It needs to be exchanged. It needs to all cross from one technology to the other. It needs to, essentially, the data needs to collaborate. The information needs to collaborate. So it's not a silo anymore. But technology, as I often say, despite the fact that my job 90% centers around technology and technology selection, really only solves about 20% of your problems. Those of you who have been to this conference before hear me say that often, but I will say it probably for many years to come. There are human factors that play into success that are so much more important than however much money you're going to spend on a piece of software. And these are what some of them are. First of all, what exactly are you trying to solve? So many people say, I need a DAM. Okay, so what are the problems you're actually trying to solve? What are the baseline in terms of how long it takes you to do things now? What are you wanting to do that you can't do now? Setting that baseline and understanding what are the enterprise concerns you're trying to address, what are you trying to monetize, etc. You need to actually have DAM expertise and resources, and there needs to be, as I say, a locus of this, a central place where you have people who know DAM. It's probably the number one piece of advice I have to give to people. You have to hire a digital asset management administrator, or better yet, a digital asset management director or VP. It's really important. You can't just bring a vendor in and implement a DAM and have people who don't know what they're doing. And this speaks well for this growing audience. Every year we see more and more people here, and that's because there's more and more people who can play those roles. So don't buy technology and assume that you don't need that expertise, because you do. You need to advocate for DAM. You need to educate people as to what DAM is and what it's capable of. Be realistic. And you need to enculturate. This is a great word. And it's really making sure that the culture of your company knows what DAM is as a practice and as a discipline, and spread it throughout the organization. And then you decide, okay, we're going to have a technology, we're going to pilot the technology, and we're going to build the right tool set around it. The number one mistake I see people make is they spend too much. I know the vendors hate it when I say that, but most companies do. They overbuy. They buy components they don't need, or they pay for a whole bunch of stuff up front that they're not going to use for 2 years. And then they pay for all these licenses that they don't need for a while. So make sure that you're piloting and building the right tool set, and you're starting small. And as you enculturate and as you educate, then you bring people in. And then it makes sense to add more licenses and more servers and all that sort of thing. And then finally, make sure you're supporting it and you're measuring it as you go. A little bit about trends as I start to wrap up here. So every year I talk to hundreds of end users of DAM systems. I tell them I talk to them and I ask them about what are they doing with DAM today. I also get constant briefings from all the vendors that sell DAM solutions, and I ask them about what their customers are thinking. And that's how I think about brand spaces and brand management and media management today. And these are things, some of which have come up in prior years, but I think are more prominent. Mid-market vendors. What do I mean by mid-market vendors? Well, I'll be talking about that in my session later today on the market. But these are smaller vendors, companies that are between 40 and 100 people. Many of them are here. And they're pure play vendors, meaning all they sell is DAM. They're not big enterprise vendors that also sell lots of other software. These vendors are doing extremely well. They're closing deals like crazy, but they don't have big resources teams. They also don't necessarily have systems integrators, or enough of them, to support all their implementations. So I see these companies closing deals like crazy, and I think it's a sign of the growth of the DAM market and the need for DAM. But there's a dearth of resources in this regard. So I constantly get calls, Theresa, can you tell me, who can I call to help me with this implementation of X, Y vendor? So it's important to think about. European DAM vendors are growing a lot, very quickly. Many of them are here this week. That doesn't mean they have staff here. And I often say the same thing to my European clients. There's American vendors over there, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily have staff there. So they're growing, they're doing well. All these vendors really are growing and doing well, but just to caution those of you who are buying to be careful and make sure you're going to have the staff and the support that you need. There's still not a lot of open source choices out there. It's a question that I get. There's a few small commercial open source vendors that are out there, but they're very, very small. Again, you're talking 12 to 20 people who can support the solution. So exercise caution. Video. I think Perry covered this pretty well. Media. Video is a communication medium. It is not just the domain of broadcasters anymore. It's huge. Everybody's creating video. And it's interesting that from a consumer standpoint, it's so easy. You can go to YouTube and you can create a video and you can put it up there. And it's simple and it's straightforward. But it's still quite challenging for the enterprise, and it's still quite costly for the enterprise. And one of the big questions I get today is, well, I have a digital asset management system. Is that also a media asset management system? The answer is usually not. DAM vendors tend to be very focused on imagery, brand management. Most of them got their start with ad agencies, for example, and aren't very focused on high-end video management. We are, in fact, starting an entire new research area just for MAM, because it is so unique, and the vendors are so different, and the market is so different. So if you have very high-end video needs, you might need to think a little differently. SharePoint as an entry point. Many people want to be able to access their DAM through their intranet, which is often SharePoint. So how can you integrate with SharePoint? Is it possible to integrate with SharePoint? This is a very big question that I get as well. And just integration in general. We have a whole session on integration tomorrow, so I won't talk about this too much. Joe Bahana from DPCI and his team have a lot of experience integrating dams with other teams, with other systems, I should say. So be sure to attend that session if that's important to you, and it should be if it's not. And then finally, the collapse of siloed dams. DAM historically has been a siloed application. It's worked by itself. It hasn't necessarily pulled or pushed to other systems. And in large organizations, you will often find 4 or 5 or 6 dams. And I've seen this myself going into very large companies where there's a couple homegrown digital asset libraries. They might have some small work group dams, and then they say, okay, we're going enterprise. We want to look at all of these and say, okay, can we use one of them at this higher level, or can we take a new system and bring it in and actually replace everything we already have? So these are the big issues that are out there, the big trends that I'm seeing, and there's probably others too that we'll talk about over the course of the next couple days. Another and last trend that I'll talk about is the beauty and prominence of tablets, which are huge. People know that I'm not partial to any vendor. I think last year I highlighted OpenText and Media Beacon. The year before that I highlighted Autonomy. This year I'm highlighting North Plains. I'm very impartial. But here's an example of one of the tablet apps that are out there. And I'll play it in a second. I think this is really wonderful because so many organizations, in particular, those organizations have a lot of creative people, are very focused on BYOD policies, so bring your own device. Right? They're not forcing you to use the BlackBerry anymore. They're not forcing you to use an iPhone if you don't want to. You bring your own device. And so creative people, of course, they're not waiting for companies to fund their iPad. They're going and buying their iPad or whatever tablet they would like. And the DAM vendors are doing a really great job of responding to that. And I've seen, especially over the last year, I think last year at this conference, I said, okay, here's some new ways of experiencing your DAM on a tablet. And North Plains has chosen to take the specific app route versus other companies that are specifically just saying use it in Safari in the browser on your tablet. And so this just gives you an example of what using a DAM looks like on your tablet. So you can be sitting on the beach, you can be on a train home, however you would like, and you can actually be reviewing video, doing some simple editing, kicking off a workflow, adding some metadata, doing some comments without the burden of any big, fat device. You don't have to be sitting at your desk. And this, to me, is the beauty of working in the era that we work in. Remember that succeeding at this is not easy. I know we come to these conferences because we want to feel encouragement from each other, and that's why we're here. And we're here to help each other, we're here to learn from each other. But discipline and work is really required to succeed at this. So as I wrap up, remember you will hear a lot of marketing hype, always, but make sure you take a really hard look. Technology really only solves a few of the challenges. You solve the rest of the challenges. You and your discipline and your intelligence and your hard work and your ability to get buy-in from your coworkers, your bosses, your executives around them. Don't take on undue risk. Make sure you test, make sure you try. Often salespeople are not candid, so test and make sure you're making the best choices possible. And there's a big market out there, and a little bit later this morning, if you'd like to join me, I'll be talking about the market. I have 2 colleagues here, Kenzo and Ben, who are there, right there in the middle. If you'd like a copy of this map, this is our subway map that we use to represent the vendor marketplace. And it's what we use as basically a sort of compass and a steering point for people who are looking at the vendor marketplace. I know we're already a little bit behind time, so I won't talk about it now, but if you are looking to learn more about vendors in the market, Kenzo and Ben can give you a copy of this map, and I think my session this morning is in about an hour and a half. And that's all I have to say today. Please feel free to visit our website. You can download a free excerpt of our research, and I will be happy to take any questions if we have time. Thank you very much for listening.